Welcome to the Real Triathlon Podcast. I'm your host, Garrick Lowen, here with Nicholas Chase and Jackson Laundry.
Today, of all the days, I decided was the day. We're bringing on a guy that I just got to know more and more over the last probably 5 months or so, right, Seth?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, we're having you as a guest on our podcast. Seth, as many of you know from our intro, is the owner, creator, inventor of the Stupid Questions podcast, which we'll get into why you've named it that, etc.
Yeah, sure.
But Seth, thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's a honor and pleasure. This is my first other podcast showing up
First
other
guest
than the stupid
appearance.
questions. Yes, guest appearance. That's what they call that. Yeah.
So you have been putting together a podcast called the Stupid Questions Podcast. Now, I want to get into the name, the inception of that, and
Sure.
what the goals are for you as a podcaster, athlete, person. But before all that, how's it going, man?
It's going pretty good. I just got back from a trip on Monday night, like 1 a.m. So still recovering from that, but the trip was phenomenal. I got to go spend a couple of days prior to this 3-day retreat in Whistler, British Columbia, which Whistler's amazing. It's the first time I've ever been there, but unfortunately, it was probably like the worst conditions in the past decade. It rained the whole first day, which was
Oh,
not the best experience. But then the next day it snowed a little bit, so that was nice. But yeah, the 3-day trip was actually one of the most transformative, honestly, moments in time that I have ever experienced. The focus of it was kind of an informed situation where people were really educated in and around the idea of how to relate to oneself and personal growth, but specifically kind of honing in on trauma and things that you've experienced in the past and how you might be able to overcome those. So they gave a lot of really amazing tools and processes. And yeah, I mean, there was a cohort of about 40 people, and I honestly can say like I fell in love with each one of those people. It was such
wow.
an interesting experience to go through something like that as a group and to just see these people be humanized on a level that I really I don't say that like lightly either. From those who do know me, which probably not many people do yet, I'm a relatively critical um and quick to judge person. And this has really challenged that and transformed the way that I think I just see people in general. And I actually learned this one amazing fact that I'd love to share really quick.
Please.
And I didn't know this. But you know how like it's really hard for us to like look at someone in the eyes for
Oh,
an extended part of time?
I
Yeah.
tried to do that at airports on purpose, and it is
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah. It literally is so hard. Like you get to like 2.5 seconds and you're like, I gotta look somewhere else.
Yeah.
But one of the exercises they had us do was to like look into each other's eyes for 15 seconds. And especially if you're looking into a member of the opposite sex's eyes for that long, I'm like, this is inappropriate. This is not good. But I've learned
Like
that,
I just fell in love with you.
yeah, exactly. But I found out that after I think it's 10 seconds of looking in someone's eyes, or not statistically, scientifically proven, your brain starts to give off a chemical that they call the love chemical, and you start creating a bond. So I was like, wow, what if we did that with everybody? It would be super awkward, but it creates this curiosity where you want to know that person. So yeah, all of that to say it was an amazing trip and experience, and looking forward to continuing to process it. Um, and I think it really is going to up my triathlon training game as well, honestly.
Wow. I mean, you opened this podcast as I knew you would. You opened it with such a reverent kind of feeling and emotion, and I think that opens the
Mm,
door into the type of guy you are. And I think as I've been getting to know you more, you're definitely deep. You're maybe I saw this meme the other day. It was like introverted with selective extroversion or something like that. So I
yeah.
think I think that you might ride that canopy quite often. So part of this sport is very spiritual for many people. It is a
Mm,
transformative experience to be out there on your own, grinding away. But for what you've just described, it's about the personal connections that are
mm,
intermingled within all of us that we sometimes mask with training and more tasks. And it
yeah.
sounds like you took away a lot of the noise, really, on
Mm,
purpose to
Yeah.
focus on yourself. And it seems like from as I'm getting to know you, you put a large emphasis on putting the noise away and making sure that you
Mm.
are a priority at least once a week to make sure you're taking care of business.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for saying that. And I don't want to skip over the affirmation that you gave for kind of noticing that about me. That does mean a lot. So thank you for sharing that. And then secondly, yeah, I wish that I had like one kind of soundbite or a few sentences to explain like, oh, here's everything triathlon has taught me. But it's been an amazing experience because, and not just triathlon, with the podcast and then the greater experience of my life, it's a constant, ever evolving understanding of what the past and present are, and then what the future can be based on what I've learned, just in radical experiences, everyday mundane experiences. And I'll share just one tidbit that really does like apply to the biking kind of lifestyle that a lot of us have to live, because the majority of our training usually gets done on the bike. So when I first started riding my bike years ago, it was quite a frightening experience because I was familiar with bikes because I grew up on a dirt bike and kind of the dirt jumpers and stuff, but never anything endurance. And then you get real skinny tires. It's like, okay, this is a little bit different of handle and feel and this, that, and the other. So I had a number of different reservations. But as I started spending more and more time on my bike, my coach at the time, who I started working with, gave me these power workouts, and these things were not easy. Some of them were easy rides, but I'd never really had any type of interval based training before. And when he was giving me those, I was like, man, this is hard. So then he invited me on this, what I would consider at the time, like a very long bike ride. I'd never ridden anything over like an hour and a half. And he's like, hey, let's go on this 3-hour bike ride. There's going to be, 9 of us going out. We're going to do this like 60 so mile ride. And I was super nervous. I actually felt, probably as nervous the night before as I would before a race. Like I was like, oh, I gotta eat right. And I had a lack of education and knowledge. I had like all of these like very solid foods and didn't have electrolytes down, didn't know anything. But anyway, I went on this ride and we get in 10 miles and I'm like, this is the hardest thing ever. I get dropped mile 15 so bad that they wait for me. And all I'm thinking about is like the pain that I'm experiencing, looking down at my front wheel. And as I start to approach them, all 9 of them are waiting for me at a stoplight. And I'm like, oh, great. Like this, literally the smallest. I'm
Guys.
not a huge guy. Like I'm already like, yeah. And I roll up on them and I can't unclip in time. I fall on 2 of them. I make them fall. And, it's just like this super humbling but embarrassing moment where I was like, all I could think about was the pain I was experiencing. I did finish that ride. Luckily, I knew where I was and I got dropped so hard. Someone came back to me. I was like, dude, just go on. Like, I know where I am. Like, let me just wallow in this just sad moment that I'm having. And I got back home and I was like, wow, that was like a horrible experience, but I felt really good that I did it. And as time went on and on and on, I had this realization probably about a year later. I went out for a ride, literally more power than I'd ever put down before. Comparatively, I was probably like averaging, I'm a small guy, 120 some pounds. I was averaging on that ride maybe 130 watts. This ride, it was like 3 hours long, and I was averaging close to 200. And when I went out for my warm up, I realized like I was holding these power numbers that I had never held before, and I was able to kind of look up and not just focus on the pain of my wheel, but like look further ahead and see the trees and hear the birds and take in the rays of light. And I realized like that's so interesting because I in the beginning, I was feeling that intense pain, and all I could think about was like my immediate surroundings. But as I gained that tolerance and that endurance over time, I was able to look beyond myself and like get outside of my own head and the pain I'm feeling, and still putting out the same amount of power, still going through that same trial, but being able to look further ahead and like take it in. That really does kind of sum up, I think, my triathlon journey, is that with each step going forward, I realize that perspective changes so radically the more you gain and build upon yourself.
Did you prepare that ahead of time? Did you went full circle?
No, I actually didn't prepare that ahead of time, but I have given a talk before where I talked about that specific story as it relates to other things. But it was like I live my life in moments like that where I try to really articulate them in my own mind and then say them out loud, because I think there's a lot of power in being able to have a thought, but then to speak that into existence, because it's really quick. You've probably had this experience. You think of something, you
Yeah.
say it out loud, and you're like, wow, it's amazing. Or you say it out loud, and you're like, wow, that was the stupidest thing I've ever said. Like, yeah.
Most of the time, it's the latter for me,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I won't stop. So,
We're all there.
Seth, to your story's credit, we've all been there. I think in some relative language or information that we've all gone through feedback systems we've all wanted to die on a ride and felt like the biggest piece of trash dragging everybody down in
Mhm.
some way, whether you're getting 2 or 3 flats and everyone's like, man, another flat, it's you again.
Yeah.
Like it's so relative. And I think that's really why this sport, this lifestyle, this mindset, this journey is really connecting us in a way that we also put up blinders to because we're so busy
Mm,
and we don't make time for anything else out of our selfish nature. So this is
mm,
a very human connection sport. Um, and to your points, that's why it's so valid. That's why you went to Whistler. That's why you're
mm,
searching for a bigger meaning for everything that you're doing. It's not just, I did it, I'm done. You want to learn. And I think that's
yeah.
really where most of our listeners are. And that's why we're having you on today to talk about it on a big level. And before we get too far ahead, I do want to backpedal just a little bit.
Hmm.
Seth Hill, where did you come from and how long have you been in the sport? How many years ago since that first ride? And then please dive into Stupid Questions podcast. First
Yeah.
and foremost, I want to know why you named it that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, I guess, yeah, my name's Seth Hill. I'm 31 years old, 5 foot 5.5 inches, 125 pounds. Proud of that.
Height
Grew
and
up
weight.
being, yeah, height and weight. Definitely grew up a smaller guy. I grew up in a relatively good home, I think, until I was about 16. It's interesting when we're kids or when I was a kid, looking at the world, it's very black and white. We look at our adult surroundings and we're like, oh yeah, they are it. Even though I may not like it, they are the source of correct. And as I got older, life started to happen. Just to be completely transparent, like when I was 16, my dad passed away. He took his own life, and it was at that point that I think I really woke up for the first time. I mean, I'd had other experiences in my younger past where like were impactful moments, but that one really shook me for obvious reasons. And it really forced me to look into the mirror in the coming years and ask the question like, who am I? Who do I want to be?
Mhm.
Because as that happened, I was forced to kind of deal with other things that were bothering me in my past, and I came forward about them to my mom, and I mean, it was really ugly in the beginning. I told her like, "Hey, you know what? I've been struggling with this. Um, I was abused, I think, by someone in our family when I was this age, and I don't know even how to talk about this, but it's all coming forward because of what happened with dad, and I just feel like I'm completely overwhelmed with my internal mind, and I don't know how to deal with this." And that moment was when I first realized, especially like right after my dad passed, there was a couple of key people in my life who were like, "Hey, you have to talk about it." And one thing I did know about my father is like he never talked about his problems. Like he went to therapy every once in a while, but he was very inconsistent and he wasn't like voicing what was going on. And I realized like, okay, my greatest fear, and I kind of figured this out even this weekend, but my greatest fear at that point in life was I feel like I will become the men who have abandoned me and hurt me. And I don't know why I fear that, but that is my greatest fear. So I worked really hard for the next like 6 years off and on trying to figure out life and went through like some very odd, crazy times. Like high school is already complicated enough, let alone you throw in some other junk like that. Like, yeah, like I'm super late bloomer. Everybody else is changing. I'm not changing, but somehow like my childhood was robbed from me in a sense. And I'm like, well, I have to be the man of the house. And there's just all of this muck just going over and over in my mind. But I realized like I got to start talking about this and try to figure it out. And I worked through in the beginning stages, I say like the stages of grief. And I think there's 5 of them. I can't quote them all, but I know that they can be repeated and they can be experienced at different lengths, like anger, denial, resentment, kind of mixed with anger, um, grief and sadness. And for a long time, I spent like a lot of this time in anger and then denial. And I was not able to kind of come around to this place of acceptance probably for like 6 or 7 years. And as I did, I was like, okay, I should probably work on these other things. And then the next point in my life, I think that was like a big shifting turning point was I got to college. um, it's really interesting. My senior year, I was dating this girl, and her dad was a construction owner, like of a houses, like multi-million-dollar homes. And if anyone knows where the Biltmore Estates are in North Carolina, near the Biltmore Mansions, like these are,
I think the name Biltmore sounds
yeah, a little,
fancy enough.
yeah, exactly. So he's building these like $5 million homes, and I was working on these construction crews with his different foremen. I would get to do some electrical stuff. We did some like framing and general like plumbing and other stuff. And that experience was a good one because I was like, okay, well, this is very plain to see. I'm dating this girl. She's obviously a much better person than me. This man has no sons. I'm gonna go to college, get a construction management degree. I'm gonna, take over dad's business, and then and farewell, happily ever after, yada yada. I get to college. She realizes,
You
wow,
jumped to a lot of conclusions there.
a lot of conclusions, but they were so clear in my mind. I was like, this is definitely how it's gonna happen. She got to college. She broke up with me. I was not a very good person, so it's all worked out, and we're actually relatively good friends now. One second, someone's gonna drive by here, so you may hear a car in the background. Apologies.
I don't know. I think your mic is so good, man.
Oh,
Noise
perfect.
suppression.
So anyway, yeah, I we broke up and I got to college. I screwed around for 2 years and then I had the opportunity, one of my friends, she doesn't even realize how impactful this was on me, but she was like, "Hey, um, you should go be a student missionary through our school because like they encourage people similar to the Latter-day Saints, like go spend some time in mission service. Some people go do like a college abroad, and some people go do missions, and some people just don't do anything. And I, for whatever reason, was like, yeah, I think I should do that. And I'm a relatively like religious and spiritual guy, and I thought about this in like prayer and just kind of chomped on it for a while. And long story short, I did not come from a wealthy background at all. Like I was paying my way through school, and by paying my way, I mean going into crippling debt. But it just so happened that someone made an anonymous donation to pay for all of my expenses and the semesters that I had not caught up on. I had no car and I was staying at the university, and there was a person up the road who not only offered me a job, but my coach for the acrobatic team that I was in college, he had a basement that he allowed me to stay in, and it was with walking distance. Like literally it was a street over. I hopped a cattle fence and I walked across the field, and that was my job. And I was building this house all summer. And so it was like all of these very serendipitous, divine things happened where I was able to go and have everything kind of figured out. And I was like, great, well, I'm going to go be a missionary. I was a horrible person, honestly. But I was like, I'm going to give up self in this. And honestly, I had this thought in my mind, like, I'm going to be a light in a dark area. I'm going to go help these people. And I really kind of subscribe to this idea that whenever I go or wherever I go, I'm gonna hop on a plane and all of my troubles and kind of issues are just gonna kind of fade in the West type of a situation. And I got over in the Philippines. Actually, it's kind of crazy. I'd never gotten drunk before, did any drugs, but like literally the night before, I got drunk for the first time, like very irresponsibly drunk.
Yeah, too
And then,
drunk.
yeah, and the next day I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go do this thing, just like in the sphere that I was living in, like a very awkward juxtaposition. So I got over there, and honestly, man, to sum up 9 months, it was the hardest time of my life, but it was literally the greatest time of my life because it forced me to look at one huge thing that was, well, no matter where I go in the world, my problems are going to follow me, and they sit within my chest and in my mind. They don't. I can't just drop them off somewhere and say like, "Sayonara, I'm a changed person." So it really forced me to look at the perspective. I mean, living in a different culture, a different way of living life and approaching life and viewing life, from the climate to the income level to just how people commuted to and from work, really shifted me and forced me to think. And I met a friend over there. His name was Gray. Um, and was 18, was taking Harvard summer classes, had his own bottled water company, and just on the outside looked like this man who had never known. I was about to be 21, and I was like, well, what it was so different about this man? And then he told me as we became better friends, he's like, well, my dad co-founded Oakley Sunglasses.
Ah,
And so my interest, for very opportunistic and terrible reasons in the beginning, was, I mean, I did enjoy him as a friend. We got along great, but I was suddenly very interested in him. And I wanted to know, like, what is this mindset that he carries, which is obvious, what 18-year-old has their own bottled water company and goes to Harvard? Not many that I'd ever met in my sphere. And it challenged me to be a better person. Um, along with some other stuff that I was dealing with, and I started to really tackle addictions and all of these things. And um, you know, as that happened, I started reading like an accounting textbook that someone brought over. I am not a studious person, and I hate school, but I was so motivated to change something that I was just grabbing onto any piece of knowledge I want. I tried starting a little business over there where we made sugar water popsicles and sold them to kids, like probably the worst kind of business that made absolutely $0. But it really like it inspired me. So I got back to the US and I had an entrepreneurship class, and this is all going to come first full circle relatively soon. Um, but I had this entrepreneurship class, and right before I left, I had this idea. I was like, I want to start a company, and I want to have a hammock that has insulation on it, so I can go camping and like not be cold. Because I went camping, and the insulation got real thin underneath. When I was on this lake and the wind coming through, and I got what I called CBS or cold butt syndrome. And anyway, I took this class, and in the class, they were like, "Hey, you're gonna make a prototype and you're gonna start a business." I was like, "Well, maybe." And Gray's dad, the Oakley guy, his dad lived just down the university hill, and he came by, and Gray and I became really good friends, and he actually kind of had a couple of like life-saving moments together because he had diabetes insipidus, and he like almost died because he didn't have the right
Yeah,
fluids in the Philippines.
probably
It was just
anaphylactic shock, etc.
yeah, it was. I still don't know a ton. His dad started a foundation to like deal with that wild disease. Um, and anyway, so we became very close friends outside of him and what his dad did. We just became very close relatively quickly within 9 months. Anyways, dad came to visit the school, and I just pitched him this idea, not thinking anything of it. I just knew that he had started a business. I was like, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And I told him, and I was super pumped. And he's like, "Oh, cool." And then he left. But then like a week later, he's like, "Hey, I talked to Gray, his son. I was like, I'm gonna give you guys a little money to start this. You guys should partner together. Gray has some experience in this, and you guys should try to make something of it." So long story short, again, I started dating this girl, and her uncle, who lived right by her house, which I got invited to her house for Thanksgiving. He had a commercial sewing machine. Gray's dad provided funds for me to buy all these different fabrics and stuff, and I picked this guy's brain on how to make a hammock because he actually was like big into this scene. It's what they call Graham Weenie community. It's like they're making really lightweight camping stuff for camping. And I pulled all this stuff together over Christmas break, Thanksgiving break, and then Christmas break. Made a couple prototypes. One thing led to another. Fast forwarding, I get through college, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this full time. I started a Kickstarter. We sold like $20,000 worth of hammocks. I wasn't like super great, but it was enough to give me the confidence, like, okay, I need to do something about it. So I found a manufacturer in the US. Kickstarter ended. Manufacturer calls me. Well, I show up actually to this manufacturer that I was going to use. I walk in the door, and I had probably $5,000 or $6,000 worth of materials there that he was supposed to make this sample because I had samples that I had made with someone, and they were supposed to produce what's called the gold sample, which is like the production ready. Here's what we're going to make on the line. And I showed up, and the dude like ruined half my materials. His laser cutter cut it all wrong. He had no progress. And not only that, he had been like ghosting me for weeks, and it was an hour and a half away, so I couldn't just go. Didn't even have a car at that point. So I was like, oh my goodness. And this is actually kind of the amazing part of the story. I thought this was more common, but I had some friends, or not even friends, but people reaching out to me that saw my Kickstarter from China, and they're like, "Hey, we can make this." And I was like, I don't know. I still kind of had this mentality like China, made in China, China's cheap. Bleh. So anyway, I called him up like the next day because I have $20,000 of money that's really not mine with nothing to deliver. And I was like, "Hey, I'll come visit." And they're like, "Great. So come here. We'll pick you up and we'll bring you to the factory and we'll tour you around and you can do it." And it was amazing, Nick, because I only paid for my flights as soon as I landed in Ningbo, is the name of the city. They picked me up free of charge. They took me to the factory. They fed me. They put me up in a room. They toured me around a factory. They paid for my bullet train tickets to a competing factory. Then that factory, the people picked me up. They showed me around to all the suppliers, and I went to another factory. And I was just so blown away because when I got on the plane to go to China, I had made no money, but I felt like I made it. Like for me, I grew up watching How It's Made and Mr. Rogers' little segment where they have the making stuff, and I was like, that's who I am. And I
Yeah.
got there, I was like, this is it. Like I've totally made it. But I got there again, long story short, fast forwarding, we ended up doing work with them for a number of years. we had what we call the POs made, where we made a purchase order for a number of hammocks. We sold through the lots. We had a second edition come out. Time went on, and then COVID happened, and it all went bust. That's the short end of the story. And so after that was ending, I really started to realize like I need an identity change because I felt like so painted in a corner that I was the hammock guy. Everyone knew me for that since college, and it was the first thing where I had come up with my head and people saw value in. So a lot of my identity was wrapped up in this thing, which is going to the podcast really quick. Why I love asking the question like, if you were to lose your leg tomorrow or your career was to end tragically tomorrow, whatever, or when it does end, what do you want to do next? Because I found it so fascinating that I had such a struggle with this. And if I was an athlete for my entire career life, and then all of a sudden one day, because of age, when I have 70% of my life yet to live, it was shut down, I would be devastated. And I know that like a lot of Olympians struggle with this. So that's we'll go to the podcast in a second, but that's why I love asking that question. But I was like, I need to figure out who I am.
Mhm.
And I sat in a Walmart parking lot after it was actually during COVID, and I talked to my wife. I was like, I think I'm gonna close it down. I can't get to China because of COVID. And I started selling PPE because my Chinese friends were like, hey, if you need stuff, let me know. And I ended up shipping around the world, mostly in the US, to a bunch of dental offices and hospitals like PPE. And that was like this thing I started overnight in March 2019, whenever when COVID started. And I did that, and that had kind of come down. And I was like, what am I going to do next? I got to figure something out. And I had no control. I felt like I could control the PPE thing after it had sway, but I didn't have control of that.
Mhm.
That the market changed. And I was like, I have no idea. So then I started to like get into triathlon a little bit. One of my friends, so my wife and I, how we first spent time together was we did a college little sprint triathlon, and it was a great experience. One of my friends in film school did a little documentary of it. Maybe I could link that. It's really hilarious to kind of look back and see it, but it was this whole you know, thing. And me and my wife did this college level triathlon sprint together, and that's how we got to know each other. And I thought back on it, I was like, that felt really good. And I thought about like training and like what I could become. I was like, that's something I think I could control. And my cousins asked me, hey, do you want to do this triathlon again with us? The one that I'd done, this would be like my second time doing it. And I was like, yeah, sure. So I trained, quote unquote. I did the race. I got there. One of my friends or my cousins who I trained to do it with, he had just come off doing Chattanooga 70.3 a
Mm.
week before. And I thought I was going to beat him. Like, I really believed that I was going to beat him. He destroyed me by like 20 minutes on a sprint course. So, that's bad. And then I decided in that moment, I was like, I'm going to do a 70.3 and I'm going to beat all of them. And so that really set the fire to start training. And it's crazy, Nick. I sat in this little tiny home here on my bike with like one of those very cheap just fluid based trainers, spinning for 45 minutes, and I had this wild belief. I was like, I think I could be a professional at this. I'm like 20. How old was I at that point? I was like 24, 20. Yeah, 20. No, I was like 26. What am I saying? I was much older. And I had this wild idea, and I didn't tell anybody about it. But as I started to progress, I was like getting a little closer and started to believe. And I feel like I'm sort of on the cusp. I'm not super talented, but it's like within the grasp and the different ways you can do it and the different pathways. So, yeah, that's how I got into triathlon, and it gave me a sense of control. It gave me a sense of identity. And honestly, in the beginning, it was very selfish. I was running from my old identity and trying to find a new one and scramble. But then I realized, oh man, like the values I had for Sway, which were like the comfort, security, and warmth, which we can get into that if you really want to. Those values were not just the company. Like everything that underscored that company and underscored the other work I've done, like that is me, and I can transfer that over to anything else. Um, and yeah, so that's how I wanted to start the podcast. I started it less than a year ago, probably like last June or July. I had with my friend decided to record a podcast, and he has a word of the year, a phrase of the year. And the year before was like the year of cardio, and he did like just crazy cardio things. He hated cardio. So he went out of his way. And then he had a year of rejection before that. And he like just applied for these CEO positions, which he made it to like he's 20 something, made it to like several fourth, fifth interviews, never got any job. But I challenged him. I said, how about this is the year of giving? And in every month, starting in January, you give $100, and the next month it doubles to 200, and the next month you go to three, and then all the way up to 1,200. And we're gonna record that story. And halfway through, which was an amazing podcast, it's called Give Well if you wanted to listen to it. Just 12 episodes once a month. I realized like, man, I love doing this. Like I love talking to people and and pulling from them their story and trying to figure out what makes them tick. And I had a list of what I consider cool names. And I was like, these people would be interesting to talk to. And Victoria Brumfield, the current CEO of USAT, sent out an email about something saying she was the new CEO. And I was like, this is my opportunity. I emailed her. I was like, Victoria, you should meet with me. I'm a cool dude. Said something along that, and I got blown off. So I emailed again, and then her assistant got with me, and I set up a time. And after that conversation with her, I told her about the idea, and she's like, "You should totally do it." So she ended up being like our fourth, fifth, sixth guest or something. And it's just caught wildfire. I chose the name Stupid Questions because it comes kind of twofold. One, from a place of insecurity, because I was trying to like really just like say, yeah, like I don't know what I'm gonna ask, but these might be a stupid questions, but I want to try to dive into who you are. And the other side of it is like there's really no such thing as a stupid question. You can ask questions stupidly. I think that's possible. But if you have a genuine curiosity about someone's life, I really don't think you can go wrong because they'll kindly correct you if it's phrased incorrectly and they'll give you how they understand it and you can kind of go forward. So that's how I came up with the name. And honestly, Nick, I didn't want to focus purely on triathlon. But of all the people I reached out to, the people within businesses within endurance sport, or like Oakley or Precision Fuel and Hydration, or the other ones, Olympians and endurance athletes within triathlon, they started saying yes. And then one other area of focus that I have some future guests coming in are like musical artists and people who are in that realm. And those are just three areas of my life that I absolutely love and love the people that surround them. So that's kind of why I've focused on that. So yeah, that's kind of who I am, how it brought me to this point and stuff.
Wow. I think I think your story, it bodes to the endurance athletes kind of time frame mindset, likeness. I think we've all got a lot of processes to work through.
Mm,
And for most of us, I think, think about the type of people who are within triathlon, right? And the ones you've interviewed who you found so valid to bring their story to light. Most
mm,
everybody has a really, really good why as to why endurance sports or triathlon is part of their daily routine. And I think it's a connective language.
mm,
It's a community of struggle, but without finding brick walls. Like I think our entire community is just bound to finding good solutions together individually. We don't give up. We
yeah.
love the process. We love to look inside and ask, where did I actually go wrong? How did I ruin that relationship? How did I
Mm,
mess up that race? So I think your introspection and your ability to kind of deal with the trauma, I think we all have trauma, but I think the level of trauma that you've been able to display and be confident and compassionate about,
mm,
it bodes well for everything within our sport. I can't tell you the amount of people that I still have in my life who hosted me when I was like my first year as a pro athlete in
mm.
Europe and treated me like
Wow.
family, took me around and made me feel welcome. And I think that's why you found your space within triathlon, because I think most people here are genuinely like, I've been through some shit. I know you have too, but
Yeah.
ultimately, like we're talking the same language, man. We
Yeah.
want to we want to make sure that we're living the best version of ourselves because we're not afraid. We're not running anymore from
Mm,
our mistakes. We're learning from our mistakes. And by the way, how can your mistakes help me? And I think as a culture of triathletes or endurance athletes, that's why it's like this little way of life everyone is really kind of being pulled into like a gravity well, and for
mm,
you to find it so valid to turn a lifestyle, a podcast, finances, time towards what are you made of. I think most athletes I coach are very well established people within their careers. They've done the big doctor, lawyer, pilot, everything, but
mm,
they identify as a triathlete.
mm.
They identify as an endurance athlete, and they connect more with people like us. So for sure, what I want to say is like, great job, man. I mean,
Thank you.
it takes a lot to look in the mirror. It takes a lot to look at that mirror with a microscope and then kind of pick
Mm,
apart what you're most afraid of and apply it to your daily life, your daily training, your daily why, and to build a relationship, to have a spouse who supports you. So,
mm.
man, it really seems like, I'm sure there's so many pitfalls and terrible nights and horrible experiences and, on the brink of extinction opportunities we could all have gone down, but we all
Mm,
chose hard work, perseverance, building, having COVID destroy your business in the way it did. That must have been devastating. Most people have a hard time rehabilitating after that, and they take years and years, and they maybe destroy
mhm.
their life in the meantime. So to come out of it and to try to expand and give back, like without going any further, just I think you're doing our sport, yourself, you're doing
Thanks, man.
everything that we all stand for, justice. So your podcast stands for something really cool. And I think that's why, like, transparently, I coach you now, but I know your work
Mhm.
ethic, I know your question, your attention to detail, and I really find it valid in the big picture of why we're doing this, because it's a lot of surface, you know,
Yeah.
capitalism, buy this, who's popular, who's cool, who's got the best race results. But at the end of the day, who's having the most authentic experience,
Mm.
growth opportunity? And you've for sure. I mean, I'm sure the list of things that you could put on paper of, man, this changed my life. Man, this changed my life. Man, I could have quit. I could have given up.
Mhm.
You're an icon for a lot of listeners to know we're all going through some shit and you
Yeah.
shouldn't.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for that. Being kind enough to and willing to share that. I think that's super meaningful to me. And yeah, like with the podcast, I'd say that you learn a lot, or I've learned a lot by talking to now. We've only released, I think, going on 30 episodes this week, but I've talked to probably close to 50 people. And just, yeah, like you said, we've all got a story. Mark Allen, I just put out like a 6-minute video today, actually, of him diving into the fact that we are all just people and we all have a story. And sometimes, like with the eye contact thing, it gets uncomfortable if you ask a little bit deeper of a question. But I would even say, in my experience, 9 times out of 10, if I dive in to try to ask that uncomfortable question of someone, it may be hard for them to share it. But in the end, we always come through that on the other side more connected. More people understand the power of vulnerability and like the power of connection that we all have because we are all human. We all live on this crazy, messed up earth where people were making stuff in labs. I don't want to get canceled, but like you got COVID and everything else. And it's like, come on, like what is really important? I'll tell you what's
Yeah.
important, talking to each other, not
Yeah.
being silent. And yeah, like the number one thing for I think that really sets stupid questions apart is being able to that people are willing to answer the questions that are just outside of the norm. I do love listening to how you do training plans and sports nutritionists and all that stuff. But what is most interesting to me is like, who are you? Why are you doing what you're doing? Like what when you get up out of bed each morning, what are the critical voices that are in your head that you're fighting and how do you combat them? Like those are the very like fundamental things that I think no matter your age, your walk of life, like anybody can listen to that and be like, oh wow, like I struggle with that, or maybe I should be open about that, or whatever it is.
Well, to your point, I think the biggest thing we've lost since COVID, since even maybe the last 5 to 6 years, is the ability to connect with each other on a very
Mm,
personal level. We've kind of lost a lot of that. I think we're so surfaced and we're so fear-based, and we're not really giving our full gusto into like, what how did you grow up? Why are you
yeah.
the way you are? Like, we kind of don't ask those questions very much anymore. How many, I mean, I've got best friends who I'm trickling in information over the years, but we don't sit around a bonfire anymore and just like have it
Mm,
out, like really get to the to the really depth of ourselves. And I think we're
yeah.
almost scared to, because vulnerability has been just shoved down our throat as like a big weakness. And I think that's
Yeah.
why this sport, the struggle, your ability to tap into, ask these, very smart questions, I'll say, are
Mhm.
eliciting a lot of responses that we just haven't really been, those are the human nature things that we've kind of
Mhm.
put a barrier to. So I think, getting back to the triathlon aspect of this kind of genre and podcast that we're
Mhm.
hosting right now is, when you're doing this day-to-day grind, when you're putting yourself out there, when you're setting goals, do you still like really go as deep, or are you kind of like still vulnerable to the surface level, not really that meaningful social pressures? Or are you, even with everything you've gone to, how hard is it to really separate yourself from, hey, this is meaningful to me or this is meaningful to everybody else?
You mean from like a triathlon training perspective, like me
Yeah, like,
personally?
I mean, because
Yeah.
everyone's social and looking at who's doing what and why you're not
Yeah.
doing this. Like, is that still part of your struggle?
Um, I'll say that I don't fully know in this. So because it's changed. When I did start triathlon, like it was a very self inward focused. I'm gonna do this for me, and I didn't even consult my wife when I signed up for the first Ironman. And that was, let me tell everyone in who's listening, that is a mistake. Don't do that. And it put a lot of pressure on our relationship actually, and subvertly my relationships with my friends and stuff because I was dedicating, even though it was ignorant amount of time. I was very uninformed of what proper training would be. I did sacrifice relationships for that. And as I've done it more, like I really did take a step back and kind of look at it because I realized my wife was getting a little upset. And my coach at the time, who after about a year started coaching me, he's like, hey, like family's number one and you got to keep it that way. I've seen this sport divorce people and that's not where you want to go. So I did take a step back, and full transparency, our marriage, like around year 4 was not doing great. We had some crazy stuff happen, and we kind of just started being numb with each other. And the word divorce came up, and I was like, okay, we got to really figure this out. Like, I'm going to counseling, you're going to counseling. We'll go separately, and we'll go together. And we started doing that, and we worked through it. And one of the things that I realized was like, okay, this is taking precedence over not just my wife's relationship, which is most important, but my spiritual relationship, my friendships, and my work even. Like I wasn't applying myself. This was like I was living and breathing it. Um, which did have some upside, but it was mostly downside. Like the balance was very uneven. And as I took a step back, I realized like, okay, I need to refocus. And I talked to my family, mostly my wife's family, because they grew up doing triathlon. Like her uncle was doing triathlons when they first started back in the 80s and in high school. And it put a huge strain on his life and marriage with his daughters. And I'm not going to say his name, but to be completely frank, like something that he's even had to, I think, deal with to this day to a degree. Um, and so I realized like, okay, I need to make a shift. So I sat my wife down, and it was really interesting, Nick, because I was always worried that she was going to say no, but I realized that once I gave away the kind of the control, or gave away the semblance of this is my thing, I'm going to do it, she was much more supportive. And now we like make time for each other more. And if she has a long day, like I'll structure stuff around that so that we make sure that we're still linking up and we're having that relationship. So now it's moved from triathlon was all about me to triathlon's more about a family thing. And now that I'm a little bit more in the public light, um I actually am using triathlon more. Like I do vlogs because I enjoy talking. I probably talk too much. And I'm doing the podcast because I love hearing people's stories. And it's stuff because I like doing. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. It's called EMDR therapy. It's like eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's
I've
a
not heard
type.
of that. This is new.
Okay, so it's a type of trauma therapy. Excuse me, this bug. Wow. Um, it's a type of trauma therapy where essentially you build a bank of positive resources, and it does relate to triathlon. I'll get there in a second. You build these bank of positive resources mentally. It can be a person, place, a thing. It can be inanimate. It can be a feeling, a color, whatever makes you feel a certain way. And then you go to this traumatic memory, and you think about it, and then you kind of bring in these positive things. For me, it was people and things. So I would like when I got held at gunpoint. I went back in PTSD counseling because that like wrecked me. And I brought in one of my close friends, and I sat him in the back seat of the car in my memory where I was being held at gunpoint. And my friend is like the most optimistic person. Like there can be a horrible man in front of him, and he chooses to see, well, maybe he just woke up bad this morning. I'm sure he's a good guy.
I like your
And
friend.
yeah, his name's Mitchell. Mitchell is the man. And I sat him in my memory in the back seat of the car as I'm doing this reprocessing, thinking about it. And he was more positive, and it like lowered my intensity in my mind of how the story happened and went. And I still know it actually happened, but for whatever reason, when you do this EMDR, which is usually done with some type of bilateral stimulation, so I've done it with little like um gyrating like vibrator things in each hand where it like makes a little sound or something so you can feel it, or you can do it kind of with clicking sounds.
Yeah.
You can do it visually, not to be confused with hypnosis, although there is some controversy around it. It's really worked for me, and now I know how to do that trauma therapy. And it's interesting is the lady who came up with it, she kind of stumbled upon it after she was going for long walks. She always found that she could process really well with long walks. And now the science actually does prove that when you do these types of bilateral stimulation, you're activating both sides of the brain in both
Mm.
hemispheres, and you're able to kind of bring in the emotional and the logical side and pair them together to eventually, if you know, if you're at a 10 trauma state, a scale of 1 to 10, you can, the goal is to reprocess it enough times to where you can bring that down to like a 0. I've had to about a 1 or 2. Because when I first told like being held at gunpoint story, especially like the weeks and months after it happened, every time I told it, and I'd never experienced this with other things, I just felt exhausted. I felt like it happened again, and it was just like I could not function. But now I can like tell the story, and it doesn't bother me near as much. So back to triathlon. Now what I really do is when I go out, like I'll look at my workout and I'll be purposeful on that. But especially like the easier days when it's just like, you know, a couple minutes on, a couple minutes off, or blocks, whatever, I will try to think about things that are going on. So yeah, and like that's one form of it. But now, you know, after even after this weekend, I had realized like I had started to just really get in my head and stressing all the time about what's the best way to do something. I need to go faster. I need to go slower. It's like no matter where I sat on the spectrum, I was unhappy with it and it felt like I needed to be over there. So it's really kind of settled me to realize like, okay, what's important really? Well, it's important to be active. It's important to go out and put the work in. It's important that when I show up, this is the big thing. When it's important to when I show up to race day, that I accept the physical state and the mental state that I'm in and be positive. It doesn't mean like, oh, I feel depressed. I hate myself. It's like I accept how I'm feeling. I own that feeling, and then I proceed. And I'll do my best. And if it's not the best, like in terms of like what the now numbers I wanted to hit, that's okay. There's always going to be another chance to race, and there's always going to be another chance to process it. But in the grand scheme of things, like what truly matters, it's like people
Yeah.
getting to talk with Nick. That's more important.
I think that resonates with this community because that's exactly what we fall into all the time is the result, the end outcome,
Mhm.
that outcome based goal. When I told people I was going to do this and I'm accountable to that, and if I don't, I am a failure. That is the biggest problem I have with this sport sometimes,
Mm,
and that mindset in general. I mean, Seth, it's obvious you're a wired problem solver from your entrepreneurial goals to create something better with what you've seen. I see that in, you know, that reflection in myself, even with what I try to do within the sport.
mm,
And I think that's why your story is powerful because it isn't, and I've said this so many times to athletes who are just like, I want to sign up with you, I want to coach, but I want to go to Kona. I'm like, oh man, if we, can we just
mm,
transform this whole situation into an evolution of self? And
mm,
if you get to Kona or not, that's not going to make this program valid.
mm,
Let's set some process-based goals that are going to show you what you're made of, how better of a person, how you can grow, which problems you can solve, how you can take all these tasks to be a better
mm,
person, father, wife, whatever it is. Like that's what this is empowering everybody to do in this very, I guess, complicated world we're living in. I think this sport, this mindset, everything that you've displayed in your story, it grounds us to a higher purpose of not even totally spiritual, but just like
mm.
getting back to self. What is the real reason you're seeking these things? And it isn't for Kona. It isn't for
Yeah.
external validation to go to the island and so you can talk about it and boast about it when someone says, well, did you go to that one in Hawaii? Oh, yeah, that's the one I went to. Like,
Mm,
that's not the reason you're doing this, in my opinion, or why it should be the main focus. And there's probably half and half who really buy into that. But I think for what you've displayed, the story, the charisma that you've brought into why this sport has been transformative for everything you're doing, and especially since you're processing trauma, by the way, this whole time. Like you're using sport, you're using these tools that we're putting in front of you as you and I as a team to kind of help conquer everything. And
Yeah.
I think that that's why we do it. That's the why. It's not so we can go to X. It's so we can feel and learn. I think one of my favorite movies is The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And it's mainly one of my favorite reasons because it's how I feel based on the music, the cinematography, being in Iceland, which is one of my favorite places, but also like the motto of life. I think, to feel, to live, to transform. I don't remember it, I can't quote it, but I think that's really what you and I and everybody like us are really trying to find within this realm of self, truth, perseverance, and obviously, it can go as deep as the meaning of why this is even happening to begin with. Like it's got to be about people. And I think that's the biggest message is like this sport, the connective, the community, the ecosystem we create on a day-to-day basis, it's about people. And I think that's like the most powerful thing that you and I can say right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And just to kind of build on that even a little bit further, one thing that I've realized recently is so in the way that I grew up, I was very uncomfortable with this idea of self-love. Because the way that I grew up in the paradigm and the worldview that was created around me was very much like self-love is a selfish thing. Don't be selfish, love others. And what I'm realizing, especially after this weekend, I know I keep going back to that, but I truly believe like this was the most transformative way of thinking that I've ever been exposed to by these experiences I went through. There, to quote the Bible, the number one book in the world, it's like love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, and I grew up in a very Bible centric worldview, and then the people I was around, they were like, "But you can't love yourself." Like they never said that, but they didn't teach me what that meant to love yourself. And I realized in marriage I have nothing to offer my wife if my own cup is not full. If it's not full and overflowing, there's none to pour. There might be a little bit, and if I pour too much, then I'm empty, and then it's like we're both mad at each other. So yeah, after this weekend and just some of these things coming around, I'm like, wow, like if I'm supposed to truly, which I think is a rule that is extra biblical, meaning it is way outside of religion, loving your neighbor as yourself you means you have to know how to love yourself. And I realized that I have been, Nick, I've been dead for so long to myself because I have not been taking the time to think about what do I actually need to feel loved and accepted. I told you about that fear earlier of like I'm gonna be like these men that I was, abused and abandoned by. And I realized like I was living out of fear. So I would consider myself even before this experience to be a relatively vulnerable person, but I still had a little bit of a wall. It's like I'll meet you one time, we'll get pretty deep, but I probably won't let you come much further than that. And now I've kind of thrown that outside of my wheelhouse of thinking completely because I realize if I invest in that relationship with you and I'm vulnerable to you, if I let you know what's going on, you feel a love toward me that I want to reciprocate, especially as you share. And in order for me to actually have self-love, when you tell me something I'm good at, I need to like accept that because most people are quick to say like, "Hey Nick, let's just use it because it's a funny example. Hey Nick, you have good abs." No, 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 I don't have good abs. Blah, blah, blah.
Just
Like,
genetics, man. I don't really
yeah,
work out ever. I haven't
exactly.
worked out once.
Exactly. Like people say that kind of stuff, and we deflect all of these good things, and then honestly, whenever a bad comment comes our way, especially in this social media generation with a lot of popular athletes and stuff, so one bad comment ruins your entire day because we believe it.
Yeah.
And I realized like, oh, I have to audibly take those critical inner voices, say them for what they are, and combat them literally audibly like no, I am not fat, I am not this, I am not, whatever critical inner voice you had. Mine was actually I'm fat, and I combat that with you know what, I'm actually a brave man, I am a compassionate man, I am that. And whenever people say something kind to you, accept it because that fills up that cup so you can give it to somebody else. So
Yeah. You're fat. You're PHAT.
yeah, exactly. Fat. Do you remember those shoes? Are you in my close enough to my age to remember
I'm
the fat?
older than you. I probably had a pair.
Yeah. Did you have them? Do you remember them?
No, I just saw them on commercials, of course. Didn't really put myself out there that much.
Nice. Well, I never owned some because they were a little more expensive than what we could get. But anyway,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's fair.
But anyway, yeah, self-love, it really is important. And I don't think that's to be confused with um like loving yourself. Like, oh, I don't know.
It's not a
I'm still trying to figure
hashtag.
out what that is.
It's
Yeah,
got to really
like,
mean something.
yeah, it really does have to mean something. It doesn't mean like, I don't know, like treating someone else bad because they treated you good so you can feel better about yourself. It's like, nah, that's not really it. There's things, and it's like an intuitive thing. I feel like I need to chew on that more before I make a
Well,
declaration, though.
I think it's just like pushing everything out to where you can focus on what you absolutely need at your core. And even if that's like 10 minutes of absolute do not disturb on your phone. Like
Hmm.
I think the phone is just so toxic sometimes. And that's the how I decided like I can give myself self-love by being away from it, being away from
Mm,
tasks. I oftentimes will equate my day's level of success to the amount of tasks, and I will feel good about my day
mm,
if I did tasks that
yeah,
were
same.
even mundane, medial, building towards some bigger picture. But I think like that definition, you just have to be aware enough to understand what it means and how to
Mm,
acknowledge it. So, like, I think we're coming up on the hour on this, but I think most importantly, Seth, the lessons, methods, your storytelling has been great, by the way. I really appreciate how you've kind of packaged it and taken it to a level that we probably haven't really gone to on this podcast before in terms of dealing with trauma,
mm,
introspection, how it comes to triathlon, how it's still an evolution, how you never even feel like the point is to be perfect. It's the point
mm,
is to always just be the best that you can do with what you have. And I think that's
mm,
part of the culture's pitfalls is we've got to be the number one in the world. And the same thing to your point, like how many times have you given a triathlete a compliment? Whoa, you just won your age group, man. That was amazing. And
mm,
as a coach, I know for sure some of the responses are, oh man, yeah, I felt like I fell apart here. I didn't do this. It's like nobody is willing to celebrate. And I tell people, athletes I coach especially, you get one day really to celebrate finishing a race. I don't care if you fell
mm,
short by 100%. I don't care if you exceeded 100%. You get one day to relish in
mm,
that opportunity that you've set out to do whatever it was. But you, no matter what, you showed
yeah.
up, put your best foot forward, and you've got to be representative of that work. And you got to be proud of it because otherwise, you've erased months of
Mm,
dedication, of perseverance, of growth.
yeah.
And I think, Seth, like your story, your ability to kind of look back in the rearview mirror, obviously, is it should be infectious. I'm sure your spouse appreciates it. I mean, I haven't met her
Hmm.
yet. I'm going to meet her, guaranteed. And
That's
I
right.
think I can't wait to hear some of her side of the story. But
Mm,
I think ultimately, like the message you're putting out there, the reason why your podcast is going to continue to grow, and obviously having Mark Allen on there, like I bought his book when it first came out, and it was just like surf art and all kinds of spiritual,
oh
cool
yeah.
vibes.
He's
Like,
such a eclectic man.
yeah, he's like turned into like the sensei of like, oh yeah, man, just like let it go. It's
Yeah.
whatever, Like I appreciate that. I think we all need to have like different personalities we can pull off of. I like having
Mm.
the alter ego, like whether it's like a Chad or it's like my other alter ego is Richard Banger, and which translates to Dick Banger. I don't know why. It was from a movie, but I'm like Dick Banger doesn't care. He just gets out there, he just rips it up. So I think
Yeah.
you've got to find some ways to categorize yourself for the moment. And dude, like you've got multiple hats that you've worn in life, and I think the message you've put out there is substantial. And I think that's why I'm super happy that you were able to bring it out today. And, you know, the retreat, that took a lot of sacrifice. You put time, energy, money, time away from loved ones and home. So that time you've invested in yourself, like, was that the best thing you've ever done this month?
Yes, for sure. And I have to make a plug for my friend Jared, who loves me very much, because he called me in November, he said, I bought you a plane ticket and I bought you a seat to this. You have to go. I hope you'll go, or else I've wasted this many thousands of dollars. And so he did that, Nick, for 8 of his friends. And we have
Oh,
all come through this together. I have a picture of us together, and it's like, yeah, amazing. So I can't take credit for taking this out of my schedule. I have worked on myself in the past, but I probably would not have gone. And I've signed up my wife, and I'm gonna sign up more people, and I'll send you the information because you should go too, and everybody. And it's not even like, oh, you need this. It's like we all deserve this thing.
yeah.
A
Like
greater
how
understanding.
often do we feel like we deserve to invest that much time in
Mhm.
ourself? That's the
Yeah,
hardest thing to do right now in this world.
yeah, not enough. Two big zeros.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, hey man, I'll put all this stuff in the show notes. You can link it in. Check it out. We'll have the video podcast. We'll have it on our just audio platforms, but make sure you check out Stupid Questions podcast. You've got some great guests on there. I know you're going to get more influential in this sport needs a lot of, needs a lot of help when it comes off the surface. And I think you can kind of help bring us back there. And I think I don't know. I can't wait to see who you bring on next. Like you've brought on some pretty cool guests so far. Make sure you go check out Seth's podcast, but
yeah. Thank you.
and follow and subscribe. We got to get those analytics up. I mean, that's the
That's right.
most annoying thing about everything we do within this space is we got to get clicks. But in the next couple of minutes, Seth, what is, because I want to leave this on, a shiny sunrise for you. Like, what do you
Sure.
want to do with all this? Where do you want to go? What is a quick synopsis of what this means to you moving forward?
When I first started reaching out to people to have on the podcast, I was blown away with how many people said yes and saw value in just my 56 character Instagram DM. And as I've gotten into this more, I've realized that there's just such an opportunity to get these stories out so that people realize that they're not alone and that they're similar in the way that they think. But most importantly, I want to give a platform to people who have a story that is more than just Lucy Charles is the best triathlete in the world. Like, who knows Lucy's background? And let's see a raise of hands. Literally, probably not many people at all. I want these people to have a humanizing story to see like that champion or whoever. And it doesn't matter if they're a world champion or not, but their story matters outside of what they do. And I want to offer that and give a platform to more people so that they can be authentic and real with who they are no matter what they're doing. And that inspires people. That does so many things more than even inspire people. So that's what I want to do. I want to continue to build that platform and just meet some cool people, man. I love people. Like every soul is so precious to me. I see more of that every single day, especially after this weekend. Yeah, it's just. Can I tell just one more short story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So at this event, so I have two sisters. Like one of my sisters is 19. One of my sisters is like 26. 26-year-old's having a baby. I'm the oldest. I'm a brother. At this event, we had a small group, and in that small group was a 19-year-old blonde-headed girl that was very similar in lifestyle choices and things that she was struggling with my sister. And the other girl was dark-headed, same age, and struggling with like the same level of just stress and depression stuff that my sister's been struggling with. And I was like, wow, this is so fascinating. Because to be honest with you, Nick, the way that I have coped with um my family and the choices that they have made is when my sisters especially make choices that I think are wrong. I put up with it for a very short time, and then like I realized, especially my older sister, because we had a conversation about it, is like I kind of disowned her. I quit talking to her much, and coming from a brother and an only male in a family, to my sisters, that hurt her very much. And my youngest sister, who's 19, has been recently making choices that I really don't agree with, and I think that they're really hurtful. But after this event with these girls, I fell in the most beautiful way, just in love with them as sisters because they explained their stories to me, and I got to hear who they were at their core, and they explained their relationships with their brothers and their fathers, and I just realized like, wow, I have such a responsibility and an opportunity to speak life into my sister's lives. Like I started to disown my youngest sister because of some of the decisions she's making. And as I held in like in one of these girls, like I held her in my arms and we were just crying because She was in so many ways like my sister. And I realized in that moment and giving her that affection that I had been robbing my sister of so much love and opportunity to feel something that she arguably doesn't get to feel from anybody else in the family. And so, like, going forward, like, that's what I want to do. I want to give that love to more and more people. And the culture I grew up in is like, oh, well, I was just so uncomfortable with like any type of affection because I was like, it's like it's sticky. It's like I don't know how to deal with it. But you know what? I don't really didn't like it because it makes you feel good and it makes them feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's my mission. Like I want people to know that they're heard, they're especially women, they're understood. Women have it so much harder sometimes, especially with than dudes, I think, when they lose their father. So I just want to give love. That's it. So go
I
love.
I relate to that more than I ever would in the past years, having a 13-year-old kid in
Mm,
my life who's struggling with all the kid stuff. And
mm,
she, even today, we got her first blood draw ever in her entire life. And it was a 3-week period of battle. So giving love,
mm,
giving respect, giving honor to somebody else's experience,
mm.
dude, that's like
Yeah,
one of the best things you could do to help grow the human culture. And
yeah,
we forget that every single day. So
yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Thank you for
Yeah.
speaking to your daughter's life. So we need more good dads out there, and you're a
Yeah.
great one.
Yeah. I mean, even ones who travel a ton and usually tired and smell bad, but can make decent meals here and
That's
there.
right. It's important.
Well, Seth, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure we're going to have you on again because your vision story and your energy is something I want to make sure we carry on. And of course, we'll check out your podcast as you go forward. But for now, buddy,
Thank you.
thank you so, so much for being part of this podcast. And we will make sure it is getting out there. So talk to you soon,
Sure.
buddy.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.